The quiet town of East Palestine, Ohio, became a household name when a freight train with a heavy cocktail of explosive chemicals derailed and burst into flames. But the true magnitude of the situation would only become known in the weeks and months to follow. The 150-car freight train operated by Norfolk Southern left Madison, Illinois on Wednesday, February 1, 2023. It was a routine run to Conway in Pennsylvania, home to one of the largest rail yards in the U.S. The most direct route would have run along Lake Erie to Cleveland, passing through several towns on the way. It would then take another track to Alliance, which runs eastward. But the situation quickly deteriorated. In this video, we'll explore why, with an average of more than 3 train derailments per day, this one is so controversial. We'll look at how the incident went viral on social media and quickly turned political. As the train entered Salem, about 20 miles from East Palestine, security footage captured flames emanating from the undercarriage of one of the cars. In less than an hour, it would hurtle toward a catastrophic fate. Just before 9 p.m. on Friday, the 3rd of February, disaster struck in the peaceful enclave of East Palestine when the train derailed, triggering an explosive blast, leaving devastation in its wake. And the residents had no idea this would merely be the beginning of an environmental nightmare. The preliminary National Transportation Safety Board's report found that an engineer slowed and stopped the rail cars after receiving a critical audible alarm message, signaling an overheated axle. Only once the 9,000-foot train came to a complete stop did the crew see the fire and alert emergency services of a possible derailment. The problem was, of the 38 cars involved, 10 held highly hazardous materials. In fact, one of the chemicals transported was more than 115,000 gallons of vinyl chloride, a carcinogenic gas used to manufacture plastics that, if inhaled, can increase the risk of liver, brain, and lung cancer. Additionally, the small town, with a population of 4,700, only had one full-time firefighter who was supported by volunteers. However, they had no hazmat training or access to specialized equipment. Around 300 firefighters from 50 different departments rushed to the scene, but more than 6 hours passed before those trained in flammable liquid emergencies arrived from nearby East Liverpool. To make matters worse, visibility was poor, and many of the signage boards on overturned rail cars were destroyed. Crews couldn't tell which chemicals were leaking while they caught fire around them. The fire was burning so hot that responders' gear was disintegrating.
When I got down there, there was fire everywhere. They were put into a very dangerous situation, and they kept our town safe.
Shortly after 10 p.m., hundreds of residents within a 1-mile radius of the derailment area were evacuated.
To leave the area immediately. This is the Ohio State Highway Patrol.
I was very fearful of our residents. As soon as we found exactly what was out, that's when I issued the order to get out.
In the early hours of the morning, members of the Environmental Protection Agency arrived on the scene to monitor and measure volatile organic compounds in the air. Initial readings showed no signs of dangerous pollutants except tiny particles called particulate matter, which was considered safe for the surrounding communities. Crews, however, discovered contaminated runoff in 2 surface water streams, Sulphur Run and Leslie Run. In response, Norfolk Southern emergency contractors installed booms and underflow dams to restrict the flow of contaminated water and contain and collect the floating product. Soon, aeration pumps were installed along the 2 streams to remove traces of chemicals from the creek water. 3 days later, the inferno was still blazing, and officials confirmed the burning chemical was vinyl chloride. Concerns were mounting around the rising temperature inside one of the hazmat cars, and fears escalated that an explosion could launch shrapnel up to a mile away. Rather than let that happen, authorities issued a shelter-in-place order for the entire town, as well as opting for the controlled release of the vinyl chloride. Officials warned that the controlled burn would result in phosgene and hydrogen chloride in the air. Phosgene is a highly toxic gas that was used as a weapon in World War I. It causes vomiting, breathing difficulties, and burning sensations in the throat and eyes. This imminent threat prompted the enlargement of the evacuation zone to a 1 by 2 mile area around East Palestine, just hours before the controlled release. The release happened 4 days after the derailment, using small charges to create holes in the tanks measuring around 3 inches in diameter. The hazmat would then slowly be channeled into trenches dug into the ground, where the flares were lined up to ignite the chemical and burn it off. Whatever remained would then be treated or removed. The controlled burn sent a gigantic black cloud of toxic smoke into the air. The fire lasted several hours, leaving a haze of dense smoke and noxious fumes smelling like burning plastic. Even though roaming EPA monitors still did not seem to detect excessive harmful gas levels after the release, particulate matter levels increased at specific locations in the hours following the derailment and controlled burn.
These aren't storm clouds. This is the that they burn off they burn off in East Palestine. This is not storm clouds. Look at it. This is over Darlington.
The evacuation order was lifted 2 days later, after hundreds of air quality samples tested below safety screening, including the inside of more than 500 homes. Tap water from the municipal system also didn't indicate signs of dangerous chemicals, yet community members remained skeptical about returning to their home, with many wary about the chemical smell, like paint thinners or chlorine, hanging in the air. And after their homecoming, several locals began complaining about rashes, sore throats, nausea, and headaches, raising fears that the air was not as safe as authorities claimed. When it comes to important issues like these, getting accurate and unbiased information is vital. But often, the news we receive has been already filtered by algorithms that feed our confirmation bias. This is why I'm excited about today's sponsor, Ground News. Their app and website show you how breaking news is being covered across the political spectrum. During the East Palestine disaster, left-leaning media emphasized the need for the Senate to back the Derail Act, holding railroads accountable for hazardous accidents. Simultaneously, right-leaning news focused on rail workers falling ill from the cleanup and urged the White House to take action. Ground News makes it easy to compare news sources, and you can see the political leaning of those sources. For example, when the EPA began testing for highly toxic dioxins, only a few right-leaning media outlets covered the story. Fortunately, Ground News has a dedicated blind spot feed, so you can quickly browse through news you might be missing. Ground News is run by a small, independent team of media outsiders who care about the future of news. They are not funded by a media company, big tech, or institutional investors. They're supported by subscribers. So if you're looking for a better way to stay informed about current events around the world, go to ground.news/darkhistory or click on the link in the description. Nearly 5 days after the derailment, the first of many class action lawsuits were filed against Norfolk Southern. According to the suit, the rail company failed to exercise reasonable care for residents affected by the disaster and the consequent release of hazardous chemicals. That same evening, Norfolk Southern restarted operations on its main Cleveland-Pittsburgh line through East Palestine. More than 10 days after the derailment, disgruntled community members were set to meet with officials, including Norfolk Southern representatives, to discuss growing concerns around health and safety issues. But local leaders were left to take questions from the emotional residents because the company backed out of the meeting, saying it feared for the safety of its employees. Norfolk Southern, meanwhile, started offering affected residents $1,000 in inconvenience fees for evacuations, reneging on an earlier offer to pay for motel accommodations. At the same time, the NTSB released its preliminary report that found a severely overheated wheel bearing had failed during an emergency stop, leading to the derailment. The NTSB did, however, have some strong words about the incident.
This was 100% preventable. We call things accidents. There is no accident. Every single event that we investigate is preventable. So our hearts are with you. Know that the NTSB has one goal, and that is safety and ensuring that this never happens again.
The report found no wrongdoing by the crew, or any issues with the track or the heat detectors that sounded the alarm. So the question remains, who is to blame for this disaster? Many industry insiders feel a business model adopted by rail companies led to the derailment. Precision schedule railroading makes the business more profitable by making trains longer, reducing staff, and deferring maintenance work for as long as possible.
Cut their workforce to bare bones, and now they're paying the price for it because the wheels are falling off the train, basically. Carmen were inspecting cars about 3 minutes per car. That's always been the industry standard. Now it's 90 seconds per car.
Is that because of PSR?
Yes, it's a rush job right now. And these guys are under pressure. I mean, they're working men and women, and, if they don't hurry up and get this car done, they're going to be fired.
The EPA, meanwhile, ordered Norfolk Southern to handle and pay for the cleanup. The legally binding order requires the company to identify and clean up any contaminated soil and water resources, attend public meetings at the EPA's request, and pay for the EPA's cost for work performed under the order. But the cleaning up operation was not without hitches. Nearby states were vehemently against hazmat waste from East Palestine being disposed of in their towns, but the EPA acted swiftly, saying that any states preventing them would violate federal law. Since then, neither the EPA nor Norfolk Southern has disclosed where the waste is going, although daily reports provide updates on the quantities. According to the Ohio EPA, approximately 12 million gallons of liquid wastewater and about 25,000 tons of soil were removed within 2 months. There, around 12,000 tons of excavated soil was left to clear. A month later, another Norfolk Southern train derailed, this time in Springfield, Ohio, but it would appear that there's no stopping Norfolk Southern's trail of disaster. Days later, a third train derailed just outside Alabama, hours before the CEO was due to address the Senate on proposed security overhauls. Although the wheels of change move slowly when it comes to safety protocols in the rail industry, change moved rapidly in the nation's legislature. Lawmakers recognized a need for stricter regulations as a rare opportunity for bipartisan cooperation through the Railway Safety Act of 2023. Among several safety overhauls, the proposed legislation will require trains to have crews of at least 2 people, expanding the classification for highly hazardous flammable trains, and increased fines for safety violations and higher investment into first responder training for hazmat situations. When the smoke from the derailment is cleared, residents believed it was all smoke and mirrors from authorities. Posts on social media showed contradictory evidence to what officials claimed, and residents are still concerned about the health effects and environmental impacts on drinking water. Several videos surfaced of waterways in East Palestine which appear to have a rainbow-like slick on the surface. Ohio officials downplayed the videos, saying that it's a section of Sulphur Creek close to the derailment site that is severely contaminated, adding that it was dammed in 2 places after the derailment to prevent other local waterways from contamination. Still, the footage of the chemical rainbows was also visible on surfaces of adjacent lakes, leaving residents even more skeptical about the true scale of the impact on the environment. While there has been no report of groundwater contamination, scientists warn it may take time for hazardous chemicals to pass through soil and enter the water. and it is not only humans who have been affected. According to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, nearly 44,000 small fish, crayfish, amphibians, and other species have died near the crash site. Officials, however, have yet to confirm if any non-aquatic wildlife deaths could be connected to the train derailment. 2 months after the disaster, test results still show no harmful contamination in municipal drinking water. However, locals with private wells were urged to continue drinking bottled water until tests have been completed. Meanwhile, things have gone from bad to worse for Norfolk Southern. Adding to the company's woes, it now faces a series of lawsuits from Ohio, Pennsylvania's school district, and the U.S. Justice Department. Ohio has accused the company of violating state and federal laws and disregarding environmental regulations. At the same time, Pennsylvania's school district claimed that the accident led to toxic chemicals seeping into the ground and air, which could potentially pollute waterways. And the Justice Department demanded that the company pay for the cleanup costs and penalties for releasing hazardous chemicals, which the EPA says should be completed in 2 months' time. To date, Norfolk Southern has already reportedly forked out over $24 million for reimbursement and cleaning up expenses, with the business making a record $4.8 billion in 2022. This shouldn't hurt too much. They have also promised to create funds for long-term issues such as healthcare, property prices, and water standards. As for who will ultimately be held responsible, for now, it's a waiting game. A more thorough NTSB report on the incident is only expected to be released in about 18 months, when it is scheduled to wrap up its investigations. But many believe that the true extent of the environmental and health effects will only be known in the months and years to come. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.